Good day. My name is Wolfe Braude. I am the Fruit Desk Manager at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, commonly known as Agbiz. And Agbiz is an agribusiness association with over 100 members. About 1/3 of those, or just under a third, are associations themselves. And I am the manager of the Fruit Desk. The Fruit Desk is made up of a set of associations, industry associations, covering fresh fruit exporters, grapes, deciduous fruit, citrus, subtropical fruit and berries, essentially the members of Fruit SA. They fund the post. It's an embedded policy resource within Agbiz. It allows us to amplify the voice of the fruit sector within Agbiz, but it also allows us to act as a transmission or interface in terms of trade policy and also agricultural issues affecting the fruit sector and the wider sector. So, for example, I work with colleagues in Agbiz on market access, on trade policy, on logistics, and I support the work of the other colleagues in legal intelligence and etc., similar to the rest of the team. So together we pool our resources. It allows us to engage with stakeholders and government in a coherent way that brings benefits to the respective sectors. So the work of the desk is split between trade, market access, logistics, and then cross-cutting issues, for example, around how is energy affecting the fruit sector, how is sustainability affecting the fruit sector, etc. But the two key areas are market access, and then logistics has now become increasingly a key area of engagement as well. Today we're going to focus on the market access and trade component, and I want to just quickly take you through a quick hop around the markets that we are currently in and give you some of the latest developments in that regard. I think let's head left to right across the planet. We'll start with the Americans. South Africa remains a member of AGOA. AGOA itself we expect to only get renewed next year, 2025. Not at this point because of the elections in the States. It remains to be seen what the outcome of the elections will produce, but we do expect that the AGOA will be renewed, and we do expect that South Africa, thanks to the efforts of our colleagues in government, at ministerial and presidential level even, and our business delegations that went and lobbied, we do expect South Africa will remain a member of AGOA. And AGOA is very beneficial for South African agriculture, and also is specifically for manufacturing and autos, clothing, textiles, etc. In terms of market access, we're hoping to gain further access for citrus and avos into the US market. We have requests that have been pending for years there. We are just waiting for our friends on the other side to come to a point where they will approve our requests. Moving on from America, if we look at our exposure or our trade globally, Africa is still our largest regional market, then followed by Asia, then followed by the EU. And of interest, you'll see China is now on a par with the UK, for example. We have separate trade agreements with the UK since they left the EU. So looking at the EU and UK markets, we are trying to get increased balance for our wine exports into the UK and increased access for sugar. We have formal trade agreements running with the UK. We also have one running with the EU, long-standing agreements. And with the EU, our key issue at the moment is around citrus. The dispute around the citrus phytosanitary matters. South Africa launched a dispute at the WTO. Essentially, the EU are claiming that there are pests and diseases present in the exports to the EU. And from our side, we are disputing that from a scientific basis, and we believe that our position is correct. That has now gone to a second level of the WTO of a panel that will make binding decisions, independent panel. We expect the panel to operate from about early 2025. It should reach its conclusions by the late 2025. It can be appealed. So we're looking at about a year to just over a year in terms of seeing where this goes. But we're very confident, and our colleagues in DALRAD and DTRC and government and DIRCO have been very supportive of the industry's efforts. It is a key market for South African citrus, the EU market, and the loss of value is significant from these measures. Then moving across into Asia, there are a number of markets where recently we've gained access in terms of SPS, phytosanitary protocols. Those are agreements which are signed basically saying that we acknowledge these pests and diseases exist on the South African side, These are the mitigation measures. This is what we will do to ensure that the fruit and agricultural exports reaching your market are safe for human consumption and will not be carriers of pests and diseases. And then a protocol is signed. It's not a trade agreement, but it takes so long to get done, maybe 5 to 12 years, that we effectively call it, I like to call it a micro trade agreement. But it only unfortunately opens a market for that single commodity, apples or pears or mandarins. So a full free trade agreement or preferential trade agreement is definitely better. But at the moment, our formal trade agreements are only with the UK, the EU, and then we have a number in Africa. We have 3 or so running in Africa, and one smaller one in South America, the Mercosur agreement. We would very much like to have free trade or preferential trade agreements with some countries in Asia. We'll see, and the Middle East. We'll see where that goes this year. The work on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has taken up an enormous amount of government's time and energy. And so now we'll see where it goes in the next few years. And to this end, Agbiz has put forward a proposal to government that a way to interact commercially with some of the markets that are very competitive is to sign perhaps an agricultural sector trade agreement on its own in a box. So we're going to see where that goes. In terms of market access, we've recently seen oranges get into Vietnam. We are almost at the point of oranges going into India. We've had apples and pears going into India. We've had red meat going to Saudi Arabia, protocol signed. We've had beef protocol signed this year, just a few months ago, for access into China. We've had a protocol signed for greasy wool into China. And also for dairy. We're expecting a pet food protocol to be announced shortly from negotiations which occurred a few months ago during the FOCAC meetings in China. And we are putting still efforts into trying to get something signed for abalone going forward, and a bit of tweaking for citrus. Then with respect to Asia and wider than Asia, many viewers will be aware of the BRICS forum or platform. South Africa is an active participant. We're one of the original founders of BRICS. This is now expanded. It's last year expanded. Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, United Arab Emirates were accepted as full members, and now there are almost a dozen countries which seek to become members as well. And the summit has been happening right now in Russia. So we are waiting to see if any further members get added. But the BRICS countries together account now almost for about 45% of population, 30% of global GDP. And there is no trade agreement involved. This is not a trade or arrangement. It is just a political forum or platform. What we are hoping to do, though, is increase intra-BRICS agricultural trade significantly by addressing some of the barriers which exist, and then eventually perhaps there'll be scope for looking at tariffs through some form of trade agreement. But it is a very diverse group. But the potential is enormous. For example, going into China, South Africa is responsible for 0.5% of China's agricultural imports. They import over $200 billion, and we export just about $1 billion into China. And that's just China. We're not talking about India. We're not talking about other BRICS members. So it's a fantastic opportunity in terms of agricultural trade. And we've made some proposals to see if we can speed up some of the processing in terms of admin and approvals for products getting into markets. Then coming to Africa, the Continental Free Trade Agreement is actually moving at a good speed, considering it's the largest one outside the WTO. The agreements on the trade in goods, which would include agricultural products, has pretty much landed. Now we're dealing just with the sensitive products. And then outstanding protocols are the ones on electronic commerce, on competition, etc. We can at the moment trade under this agreement with about 14 African countries, and that number is going to expand as we go forward. And it's the first time we will trade within a trade agreement with countries such as Ethiopia, Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria. So the potential for South African agribusiness is huge, but of course many challenges around logistics, etc. But at the same time, we must look back at where we were with the SADC trade protocol, the Southern African trade protocol 10 years ago. Then at that time, there was a lot of skepticism at that time about this, and now it's turned out to be hugely beneficial for South Africa. So even closer to home, to conclude on the regional information, The Southern African Customs Union is South Africa with our immediate neighbours, Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, Eswatini, and viewers will probably have seen in the press the border disputes with Namibia, border disputes with Botswana. The most recent have been the Botswanan ones. In both cases, these have been ongoing for a number of years. Botswana, they started back in 2021. And disagreements around fresh produce, the vegetables, disagreements around citrus, with Namibia, disagreements around animal products, specifically beef. The border closures themselves, including the bans, are definitely a breach of the agreement, the customs union agreement. But at the same time, there is a push for some form of self-sufficiency in Namibia and Botswana. And so we have to find a compromise. And what Agbiz is doing is talking to business communities in Botswana and Namibia to see if we can get an evidence-based approach, a set of proposals, solutions that could be presented to governments, which could help the governments have a way forward, because these matters have been unresolved for a number of years. But we believe that commercially there is a way for an amicable solution to be found. So to wrap up, to give you a sense of why we are so upbeat about the future in terms of agri-exports, it's worthwhile to note that the fruit sector, for example, is a highly export-focused sector. Over 80%, sometimes even 90% of production is geared toward export. A number of other sectors would like to also increase their export exposure. Potatoes, for example, is about 5%. They would like to go up to about 20%. The same figures roughly for red meat. And the potential for job creation and multipliers is fantastic. Some of the stats estimates are that primary agriculture, farming, is responsible for about 13% of South Africa's GDP, because it flows down into logistics, into packaging, into biotech, into all the inputs and services that go into making a farm, finance, everything that is essentially responsible for producing one orange going to export. There's a massive trail behind it. So to give you a sense of what we're talking about, it's not very well known, for example, that if you look at our exports as an entire agricultural sector, we are equivalent to South Africa's autos exports. So looking at chrome, at manganese, we're about twice the value in terms of export value. If you put the export value together, we are about twice the machinery exports as well, and even some of even the iron and steel as well. And those are significant sectors. And so in terms of priorities for trade and policy, it gives you a sense for agriculture of the weighting that we need to have, and the potential. It gives a sense of the potential. And for example, many people do not know that South Africa's fruit exports rank consistently in the top 10, and that we are actually the world's second largest citrus producer. And for other commodities, we are the world's largest maize meal exporter, chicory root exporter, macadamia nut exporter. In terms of wine, in terms of clean wool equivalents, there's a whole host of agri-exports. We are world leaders. So this means that we have a fantastic foundation on which to build on. In fact, if you look at some of the news coming out of other sectors, the agricultural sector is one of the few in the country that has been able to significantly demonstrate increases in a number of economic indicators. So we feel that the agribusiness sector has an enormous role to play in governments, in the government national unity's plans to pivot towards a more export-focused economy. It's a very hopeful scenario. Agbiz is looking forward to assisting our members and creating an enabling environment for their continued economic health and for their expansion in terms of the opportunities that have now opened up for the sector.